19 families never got answers when their loved ones vanished into the earth in 1988. While countless mystery channels exploit tragedies for views, today we're uncovering the documented facts behind this haunting case. What really happened during that final shift? Why was the elevator sealed for decades? And what did investigators discover when they finally broke it open? The truth buried beneath will challenge everything you think you know about this disappearance. Before we dive into this story, I want to acknowledge you're here seeking the truth about these 19 people. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It means everything to know we're uncovering this mystery together. Black Rock Mine in Pennsylvania had been operating safely since 1952. This small mining community was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where families had worked the same tunnels for generations. The mine had maintained a spotless safety record for 36 years, making it one of the most trusted operations in the region. December 15, 1988, started like any other cold winter morning. Workers arrived for their shift at 6 a.m., just as they had done thousands of times before. 19 experienced men descended into the earth that morning, carrying their usual equipment and lunch boxes. But something was different about this particular morning shift. None of these 19 miners would ever return home to their families. The elevator that took them down 800 feet below ground was the same reliable machine that had been used for decades. It had never failed before, never caused any problems. Workers had trusted it with their lives every single day for over 30 years. What made this day so different that 19 experienced miners would simply vanish without a trace? The 19 miners were all seasoned workers, some with over 20 years of underground experience. They knew every tunnel, every safety procedure, every potential danger that could arise. They carried their standard equipment, hard hats with their names clearly marked, oxygen tanks, and well-maintained mining tools. The elevator descended smoothly to the 800-foot level, just as it had done countless times before. Radio contact was established at exactly 6:30 a.m., and everything seemed completely normal. This would be the last confirmed communication from below. Foreman Jack Morrison reported all clear to surface control following standard safety protocols. The men split into 3 separate groups to work different sections of the tunnel system, a routine practice that maximized efficiency and safety. Surface workers expected their regular check-ins every 2 hours, a safety measure that had been in place for years. The first scheduled contact was set for 8:30 a.m. Mining operations continued normally on the other levels of the mine. But when 8:30 a.m. arrived, only silence came from the radio. Surface control tried radio contact repeatedly, using both emergency and standard frequencies. The radio operator called out each miner's name individually, hoping for any response. Other miners working on different levels reported completely normal conditions throughout the mine. There were no sounds of explosions, no signs of cave-ins, no indication of equipment failure anywhere in the facility. The mine's sophisticated emergency detection systems showed no alerts, no warnings, no problems of any kind. It was as if the 19 men had simply disappeared into thin air. Supervisor Mike Chen made the decision to investigate personally. He was a 20-year veteran of mining operations and had never encountered anything like this silence. Chen called the elevator to bring him down to the 800-foot level where the missing crew was supposed to be working. The elevator arrived at the surface in perfect working condition, showing no signs of mechanical problems. Chen descended quickly to the level where the 19 men should have been. What he found down there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Chen arrived at the 800-foot level at exactly 9:15 a.m. The tunnels were completely empty of any human presence. All the mining equipment was still running exactly as the workers had left it. Lunch boxes sat unopened in the spots where the men had carefully placed them before starting work. Hard hats and safety gear were scattered throughout the work area, but there was no sign of the men who had been wearing them. But there was something even more disturbing about the scene. The emergency oxygen tanks were still completely full and showed no signs of use. There were no indications of struggle, panic, or any kind of emergency situation. The tunnel wall showed no damage from explosions, cave-ins, or any other mining accident. All of the men's personal belongings were exactly where they should be, completely undisturbed. Chen searched every tunnel, every corner, every possible hiding spot in the entire level. The 19 miners had vanished as if they had never existed at all. Chen immediately radioed for emergency backup, his voice shaking with confusion and fear. Within 1 hour, 50 professional rescue workers had descended into the mine from 3 different emergency response teams. They conducted the most thorough search in the mine's history, checking every tunnel, every shaft, every possible location where the men might be trapped. Bloodhounds were brought in to track the missing miners' scent, but the specially trained dogs became confused and visibly agitated when they reached the 800-foot level. The animals refused to go further into certain tunnels, behavior that experienced handlers had never seen before. Professional cave rescue teams arrived from 3 different states, bringing the most advanced search equipment available. They used thermal imaging technology to detect any human heat signatures anywhere in the mine system. Sound detection equipment was deployed to pick up even the faintest calls for help. Sophisticated air monitoring devices checked for gas leaks or other dangers that might have overcome the workers. The search continued for 18 straight hours without any breaks, but the most puzzling discovery was still to come. Investigators found clear footprints from all 19 miners leading directly to the main elevator shaft. The prints in the coal dust showed that the men had been walking calmly, not running from any immediate danger. All 19 distinct sets of footprints led in a straight line to the elevator entrance. But here's what made absolutely no sense to anyone. The footprints stopped completely at the elevator. There were no signs that the men had called the elevator or waited for it to arrive. The prints simply ended, as if the men had vanished into the air. Security cameras throughout the mine were immediately checked by investigators. The footage clearly showed the 19 men arriving for work and spreading out to their assigned areas. Everything appeared normal in those early morning hours. But the cameras positioned near the elevator shaft had mysteriously malfunctioned at exactly 8:27 a.m. They had stopped recording just 3 minutes before the men were supposed to make their scheduled check-in call. Someone or something had deliberately disabled those cameras at the most critical moment. FBI agents arrived within hours to take over what was now being treated as a potential kidnapping case. They brought federal resources and expertise in missing persons investigations. Every tunnel in the mine was carefully mapped and searched again using ground-penetrating radar technology. During this intensive search, they discovered new passages and hidden chambers that were not shown on any official mine maps. Some of these tunnels appeared to be recently constructed, with fresh tool marks on the walls. The mine had secrets that even the owners didn't know about. Detailed interviews began with every mine employee who had not been part of the missing shift. Workers slowly began to reveal disturbing incidents that had occurred in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. Several miners reported hearing unusual mechanical sounds coming from the deeper tunnels during their shifts. Some workers mentioned feeling watched while working alone in remote areas of the mine. Mining equipment had been moved overnight with no explanation from management. Strange vehicles had been seen at the mine site during non-working hours. The mine had been hiding something dangerous for weeks before the men disappeared. The families of the missing miners refused to accept that their loved ones were simply gone. Sarah Morrison, the wife of foreman Jack Morrison, organized the other 18 families into a unified group, demanding answers. They had no mining experience, but their determination to find their husbands and sons drove them to organize their own search efforts. Local newspapers picked up their story, and soon the case was receiving national media attention. But the media attention also brought some very unwanted visitors to the mine site. Strange people began appearing at the mine, people who clearly didn't belong in a small mining community. These visitors wore expensive suits and carried briefcases instead of mining equipment. They claimed to be from various government agencies, but their credentials didn't seem to match any known departments. These mysterious officials asked detailed questions about the mine's history and construction, but they showed little interest in actually finding the missing workers. They seemed more concerned with the underground tunnels than with the fate of the 19 men. The government was clearly hiding something about this mine. The suited officials eventually identified themselves as representatives from the Department of Mining Safety. However, when families tried to verify their credentials, they discovered that no such specific department existed. These men then ordered all civilian search operations to be suspended immediately. They declared the mine a hazardous area and forbade anyone from entering. No evidence of gas leaks, structural damage, or any other dangers supported this sudden declaration. The families were being lied to by their own government, and the cover-up was just beginning. Security guards were posted at every entrance to the mine property within 24 hours. Local police received orders to arrest anyone who attempted to enter the restricted area. The FBI investigation was suddenly transferred to unspecified federal authorities with no explanation. All evidence that had been collected during the search was immediately confiscated and marked as classified. Even the professional rescue teams were required to sign strict non-disclosure agreements about what they had seen. The cover-up was clearly much bigger than anyone had initially imagined. Within 1 week, the story completely disappeared from all local newspapers. Reporters who had been covering the case were told that it had been resolved, but were given no details about what had happened. The grieving families were approached by government representatives offering substantial financial settlements. The money came with one condition: they had to agree never to speak publicly about the case or their missing loved ones. Most of the families, desperate for answers and struggling financially, reluctantly accepted these payments. But 3 families refused to stay silent about what had happened. Sarah Morrison, Tom Bradley's widow, and the family of Supervisor Mike Chen refused to be bought off. They pooled their resources and hired Robert Hayes, a private investigator with 20 years of experience in missing persons cases. Hayes was a former police detective who had successfully solved dozens of complex disappearances throughout his career. He began his investigation by interviewing every mine worker who was willing to talk, promising them complete anonymity. What he discovered in those interviews would change everything the families thought they knew about the case. Detective Hayes found workers who had been directly threatened by government agents to keep quiet about what they had seen. Speaking only in anonymous interviews, these workers revealed a pattern of strange activities that had been occurring at the mine for months. Underground blasting operations had been heard during non-working hours when no official mining was scheduled. New tunnels were being secretly constructed during night shifts by workers who were not regular mine employees. Only certain workers with special clearances were allowed access to specific areas of the mine. The mine was clearly being used for something far more significant than simple coal extraction. Hayes managed to obtain copies of the mine's financial records through his law enforcement contacts. These documents revealed large payments coming from an unknown government contractor, payments that were labeled simply as special excavation services. The money involved was staggering, more than 10 times what the mine normally earned from coal operations. These mysterious payments had started exactly 3 months before the 19 miners disappeared. Someone in the government was paying millions of dollars for something very specific to be done in that mine. Through his investigation, Hayes discovered that the mine was connected to a highly classified military project. Leaked documents revealed that the government had been conducting a secret operation called Operation Deep Dig. This project involved extracting very specific materials from a particular depth underground. The 800-foot level where the miners had vanished was the exact target depth mentioned in the classified documents. The 19 miners had accidentally stumbled upon a government secret that was worth killing to protect. Hayes found evidence that military-grade equipment worth millions of dollars had been moved into the mine during night operations. This included specialized drilling tools designed for precision excavation, radiation detection equipment typically used only in nuclear facilities, and sophisticated chemical analysis gear for identifying unknown substances. All of this expensive, specialized equipment had been secretly transported into the mine during the months before the disappearance. The government was clearly searching for something radioactive or chemically dangerous. Based on his investigation, Hayes was able to piece together exactly what had happened on that fateful morning of December 15, 1988. The 19 miners had arrived for their normal shift at 6 a.m., completely unaware of the secret government operation taking place in their workplace. They had begun working in the same area where the classified excavation was actively occurring. Around 8:27 a.m., they had discovered something they were never supposed to see. The security cameras had been deliberately disabled to hide the government operation from any official record. The miners had found the classified excavation site and confronted the government operatives working there. According to Hayes's sources, the miners had demanded to know what was being done in their mine without their knowledge. They had threatened to report the unauthorized activities to federal authorities and the media. The government operatives realized they couldn't allow the miners to leave with this dangerous knowledge. A decision was made at the highest levels to contain the situation immediately using any means necessary. The miners were taken into custody to prevent them from revealing the secret operation. This resolved the first mystery of what had happened during that final shift. Hayes discovered that the miners were initially detained by government agents who told them they had accidentally discovered materials related to national security. The men were offered high-paying jobs with the secret project in exchange for their silence about what they had seen. When all 19 miners refused these offers and demanded to contact their families, the situation escalated beyond anyone's control. The government operatives realized they couldn't risk the secret of the operation being exposed to the public. The miners were transported through the secret tunnel system to a secure location far from the mine. Their personal equipment was deliberately left behind to create the appearance of a mining accident or mysterious disappearance. The footprints leading to the elevator were carefully staged by government cleanup crews to misdirect the investigation. All traces of the real classified operation were systematically removed from the mine. But this cover-up was about to become much more serious than anyone had initially planned. Higher-level government officials arrived to personally assess the security situation. After careful consideration, they determined that the 19 miners posed an unacceptable risk to national security. The decision was made to permanently silence all witnesses to the classified operation. The miners were transported to a secure government facility located over 200 miles away from their homes. They were held in this black site compound that was specifically designed for containing security breaches. None of the 19 men would ever be seen alive again. Hayes found leaked records of the facility where the miners were taken. It was a highly classified location used by the government for eliminating people who posed threats to national security operations. The miners were kept there for several months while officials decided their fate. During this time, they were told that their families believed they were dead and that any attempt to contact them would result in their families being harmed. Eventually, the decision was made that they could never be released, but this still didn't explain the most puzzling aspect of the case. After the miners were permanently eliminated, the government faced the challenge of covering their tracks completely. all evidence of the secret operation had to be destroyed without raising additional suspicions. The excavation site was filled with concrete and permanently sealed. The secret tunnels leading to the classified area were deliberately collapsed using controlled explosions. The entire 800-foot level was then declared structurally unsound and off-limits to all personnel. But they still needed to ensure that no one could ever access the evidence that remained. The elevator was the only way for anyone to reach the area where evidence of the secret operation might still exist. Government engineers determined that the elevator had to be permanently disabled to prevent future discovery. However, they couldn't simply remove the elevator without raising suspicions among the local community and mine workers. The solution they devised was to make it appear that the elevator had suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. The elevator was sealed to hide the truth forever. In January 1989, just 1 month after the disappearance, the entire mine was officially closed. The reason given to the public was geological instability that made continued operation too dangerous. No independent geological inspections were allowed to verify this claim. The elevator was sealed using industrial-grade concrete, reinforced with steel, a process that cost the government over $2 million. Warning signs were posted throughout the property, declaring the area hazardous and off-limits to all civilians. The mine property was quickly sold to a government shell company and fenced off as a restricted area. For the next 37 years, the secret remained buried beneath tons of concrete and steel. The families of the missing miners grew old without ever learning the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. Some of the wives and children passed away still believing that their husbands and fathers had died in a tragic mining accident. The government maintained their cover story through multiple presidential administrations. New generations of Americans grew up never knowing about the 19 miners who had sacrificed their lives to protect their community. But secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of eventually surfacing. In 2024, the government's long-term contract on the mine property finally expired. The land was scheduled to be sold to Mountain View Development Company, which planned to build a residential community on the site. Environmental surveys were legally required before any construction could begin on the former industrial property. These routine surveys were about to reveal what the government had hidden for nearly 4 decades. The sealed elevator was about to be discovered by people who had no knowledge of the dark secrets buried beneath their feet. Mountain View Development Company purchased the property with plans to create a modern residential community. They had been told that the mine was simply abandoned due to economic factors in the late 1980s. The development team had no knowledge of the mine's true history or the classified operations that had taken place there. Environmental testing began in March 2024 as part of the standard due diligence process. The developers had no idea what they were about to uncover beneath the innocent-looking concrete pad. Ground-penetrating radar revealed the presence of a large concrete structure buried beneath what appeared to be a simple foundation. The concrete seal was much thicker and more reinforced than would ever be necessary for a normal mine closure. Industrial-grade materials and the massive amount of concrete suggested that this was much more than a simple abandonment. The developers contacted local authorities for guidance on how to proceed with their construction plans. The investigation that followed would change everything that people thought they knew about the case. Local authorities were immediately confused by the developers' findings. No official records existed anywhere of the elevator being sealed with such elaborate concrete work. The original mine closure documents mentioned only standard safety procedures that should have involved simple barriers and warning signs. The concrete seal they had discovered was clearly designed to be permanent and impenetrable. Historical mining experts were consulted, and they all agreed that this was definitely not a normal mine closure procedure. The developers were legally required to ensure that their construction site was completely safe for residential development. They needed to understand exactly what was sealed inside the massive concrete structure before they could proceed with building homes. Permits were filed with the county to partially break the concrete seal and investigate what lay beneath. When these permit applications became public record, local residents began asking questions about the old mine and why it had been sealed so mysteriously. The community was about to learn the truth their government had hidden for 37 years. The permit application automatically triggered a federal review process that brought immediate government attention to the site. Multiple agencies suddenly claimed jurisdiction over the abandoned mine property. The Environmental Protection Agency filed papers claiming potential contamination from historical mining operations. The Department of Energy expressed concerns about unknown materials that might be buried on the site. But their real concern was preventing the elevator from being opened and their crimes from being exposed. The development company's lawyers fought the federal intervention in court, arguing that the government had no legal right to interfere with private property development. They pointed out that the property had been sold without any environmental restrictions or warnings. The case went to federal court, where it attracted significant media attention. News reporters began investigating why the government was so desperate to prevent a simple residential development project. The government's frantic attempts to stop the opening only made the public more suspicious about what they were trying to hide. News reports about the mysterious sealed elevator attracted national attention from true crime enthusiasts. Popular podcasts began investigating the 1988 disappearance of the 19 miners. Social media users started sharing theories about government cover-ups and conspiracy theories. The families of the missing miners, now elderly, decided to speak publicly for the first time in decades. Sarah Morrison, now 82 years old, broke her silence about the government settlement and the non-disclosure agreement she had signed. The story the government had successfully buried for 37 years was coming back to life. Documentary filmmakers requested access to the site to create films about the case. Investigative journalists began filing Freedom of Information Act requests for any government documents related to the mine or the missing miners. Former mine workers, many now retired, came forward to share their stories about the strange activities they had witnessed. The public pressure on government agencies to explain their behavior intensified with each passing day. The demand for answers was becoming impossible for the government to ignore. Federal agencies filed multiple legal challenges to prevent the excavation from proceeding. They claimed vague national security concerns, but couldn't provide any specific details about what those concerns might be. The Department of Energy suddenly declared the site a potential radiation hazard, despite having no scientific evidence to support this claim. Homeland Security issued warnings about the dangers of disturbing the sealed area. None of these agencies could provide any logical explanation for their specific concerns about opening the elevator. The more desperately they tried to stop the excavation, the more suspicious their behavior appeared to the public. Legal experts began questioning the government's constitutional authority to block private property development without providing valid scientific reasons. Environmental groups joined the legal fight, demanding complete transparency about any potential contamination. The case attracted pro bono lawyers who specialized in government accountability and transparency issues. Several members of Congress began asking pointed questions about the classified operations and why so many agencies were involved in blocking the excavation. The government's 37-year cover-up was finally falling apart under public scrutiny. In November 2024, a federal judge ruled decisively in favor of the development company. The court found no valid legal basis for preventing the excavation of the sealed elevator. Government agencies were ordered to provide specific scientific evidence for their claims about potential hazards. When they completely failed to produce any credible evidence, all of their legal injunctions were dismissed. The developers were granted full permission to proceed with opening the elevator under proper safety protocols. After 37 years of government secrecy, the concrete seal was finally going to be broken. The federal judge ordered that the entire process be fully documented and completely transparent to the public. Independent safety inspectors were assigned to monitor every aspect of the operation. Representatives from major news organizations were given access to witness and record the historic opening. The families of the missing miners were personally invited to be present when the elevator was finally opened. The date was officially set for December 15, 2024, exactly 36 years after the mysterious disappearance of the 19 miners. Professional concrete cutting equipment was transported to the site along with specialized safety gear. Detailed safety protocols were established for the excavation process. Environmental monitoring equipment was installed around the entire area to detect any dangerous gases or radiation. The families of the missing miners traveled from across the country to gather at the site where their loved ones had last been seen alive. Media crews from around the world arrived to document this historic moment. Everyone present was about to learn what the government had been hiding for 37 years. The concrete seal was discovered to be 3 feet thick and heavily reinforced with steel rebar. Industrial diamond blade cutting tools were required to break through the incredibly strong barrier. The cutting process was estimated to take several hours to complete safely. Emergency response teams were standing by in case any dangerous materials were discovered inside. As the cutting operation began, nobody had any idea what shocking discoveries awaited them inside the sealed elevator shaft. The cutting process began at exactly 9 a.m. on December 15, 2024. Bright sparks flew as the industrial diamond saws slowly cut through the concrete and steel reinforcement. The families of the missing miners watched in tense silence as each layer of the barrier was carefully removed. After 4 hours of painstaking work, the cutting crews finally broke through to create the first opening. Air samples were immediately taken and analyzed to test for any dangerous gases or radiation. The moment everyone had waited 37 years for had finally arrived. Powerful lights were lowered into the elevator shaft to illuminate the interior space. The original elevator car was clearly visible approximately 20 feet below the surface level. It appeared to be completely intact and undamaged by the decades of being sealed. High-definition video cameras were carefully lowered into the shaft to record everything that was inside. When the images appeared on the monitoring screens, they shocked everyone who was watching. What they saw on those monitors would change everything people thought they knew about the case. The elevator car contained far more than anyone had expected to find. Personal belongings of the missing miners were scattered throughout the small space. Hard hats with the workers' names clearly visible were lying exactly where they had been left. Lunch boxes and mining tools were positioned exactly as they would have been during a normal workday. But there was something else inside the elevator that made absolutely no sense to anyone present. The elevator car also contained multiple boxes of classified government documents. Dozens of files marked Top Secret were stacked in neat piles in one corner of the elevator. Military equipment and sophisticated scientific instruments filled the remaining available space. The elevator had clearly been used as a secure storage facility for highly classified materials. This discovery proved that the case was about much more than just hiding the miners' disappearance. The government had been using the sealed elevator as a secret vault to hide evidence of their illegal operations for 37 years. Recovery teams wearing protective gear carefully removed the classified documents from the elevator car. Despite their age and the humid conditions, many of the files were still completely readable. The documents contained detailed information about the secret Operation Deep Dig that had been conducted at the mine. The classified papers revealed that the government had been searching for specific radioactive materials buried deep underground. Cold War-era documents showed that the mine had been deliberately built over a site where nuclear waste had been secretly buried decades earlier. The documents revealed that during the 1950s, nuclear weapons testing had severely contaminated the area around the mine. The government had been fully aware of this contamination, but had never informed the local community. The mine operation had been deliberately established to excavate and secretly remove the radioactive materials without public knowledge. Workers had been unknowingly exposed to dangerous levels of radiation for over 30 years. The 19 missing miners had discovered this contamination and had threatened to expose the truth to the public. Their disappearance was just the beginning of a massive scandal that would rock the government to its foundation. The recovered documents revealed decades of deliberate environmental crimes committed against innocent American citizens. Radioactive waste had been secretly buried throughout the entire region during the Cold War era. Government contractors had been paid millions of dollars to hide the extent of the contamination from the public. Local cancer rates had been suspiciously high for decades, but government health officials had been covering up the connection to radiation exposure. The government had been secretly monitoring and documenting the health effects on the local population while deliberately hiding the cause of their suffering. Hundreds of families had been unknowingly exposed to deadly radiation for generations. Medical analysis of the documents showed unusual patterns of illness throughout the community that were directly linked to radiation exposure. Cancer rates, birth defects, and other radiation-related diseases were epidemic in the region. The government's own secret studies had carefully documented these health effects for decades. Government researchers had been studying the long-term effects of radiation exposure on the unwilling local population. They had been watching innocent people suffer and die while hiding the true cause of their illness. The sealed elevator contained undeniable evidence of crimes against humanity. The most disturbing files revealed that the entire community had been part of a secret government experiment. Officials had been monitoring the long-term health effects of radiation exposure on multiple generations of families. Local doctors had been reporting detailed health data to federal agencies without the knowledge or consent of their patients. Families were never told about the radiation exposure or the serious health risks they faced every day. The mining operation had been used as cover for one of the most unethical human experimentation programs in American history. The entire town had been treated like laboratory animals in a government research project. Children's medical records were included in the classified files, showing that genetic studies had been conducted on multiple generations without parental consent. The government had been tracking birth defects, developmental problems, and genetic mutations in the local population. This data was being used to better understand the effects of radiation exposure for military and weapons development purposes. The information gathered from this illegal human experimentation was considered valuable for national defense planning. The 19 miners had been killed to protect one of the most evil government programs in the nation's history. The documents revealed that the conspiracy involved multiple government agencies working together over several decades. The Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and Department of Health were all actively participating in the cover-up. Local officials, including mayors, sheriffs, and school board members, had been receiving regular payments to maintain their silence. Doctors, teachers, and even religious leaders were being compensated for their participation in the conspiracy. The betrayal of the community was systematic and complete, involving hundreds of people over several decades. Bank records included in the files showed regular payments to local officials for their cooperation in the cover-up. Medical professionals had received substantial research grants in exchange for providing health data about their patients. School officials were paid to share student health information with federal researchers. Even religious leaders received compensation for keeping quiet about the unusual number of deaths and illnesses in their congregations. The entire community had been systematically betrayed by the very people they trusted most to protect them. Evidence in the files showed that the illegal experimentation program had affected over 10,000 people across 3 generations of families. The health effects had been deliberately hidden from the public for over 70 years. Government documents proved that similar secret programs had been conducted in other mining communities across the United States. This particular site was just one location in a nationwide network of human experimentation programs. The government had been conducting illegal medical experiments on American citizens for decades without their knowledge or consent. Maps found in the classified files showed 23 other communities that were part of the same research program. Each location had a different type of contamination or radiation exposure that was being secretly studied. The data collected from all of these sites was being combined to create comprehensive research about the effects of various types of radiation on human populations. Thousands of innocent Americans had unknowingly participated in these illegal experiments over the course of several decades. The 19 miners had accidentally discovered the largest violation of human rights in American history. Among the most damning documents was an official elimination order for the 19 miners. The order was signed by a high-ranking government official whose name was clearly visible on the document. It specifically stated that the miners posed an unacceptable security risk to the classified operation. Their elimination was deemed necessary for national security and authorized at the highest levels. The document was dated December 15, 1988, the exact same day the miners had disappeared from the mine. The government had officially ordered the murder of 19 innocent American citizens. The elimination order included detailed plans for disposing of the miners' bodies at a remote location over 300 miles away from the mine. A specific burial site in the Nevada desert was designated for their remains. The entire cover-up operation had been planned and coordinated months in advance of the actual elimination. Multiple government agencies had worked together to execute the murders and hide the evidence. The sealed elevator contained the actual death warrants of the missing miners, signed by high-ranking government officials. The final document found in the elevator was an official completion report confirming that all 19 miners had been successfully eliminated. The report specified that their bodies had been buried in an unmarked grave in Nevada at exact GPS coordinates. It included detailed descriptions of the burial site and the methods used to conceal the grave. The report was dated January 15, 1989, exactly 1 month after the miners had disappeared from the mine. After 37 years of wondering, the families finally knew the exact location where their loved ones had been buried. The completion report included photographs of the burial site and detailed inventories of each miner's personal effects. Everything the men had been carrying was cataloged and then destroyed to eliminate any trace of their existence. The elimination team responsible for the murders was immediately disbanded, and its members were reassigned to different locations. All documentation of the operation was supposed to have been destroyed, except for these files that had been hidden in the sealed elevator. The elevator had been permanently sealed to hide the evidence of premeditated mass murder committed by the United States government. The final document in the collection explained exactly why the elevator had been sealed so elaborately. Government officials had realized that they had created far too much physical evidence of their crimes. The elevator shaft contained proof of the murders, the cover-up, and the illegal human experimentation program. Simply removing all the evidence would have been too risky and might have raised suspicions. The decision was made to seal the elevator permanently with industrial-grade materials. They had never expected that anyone would have the resources or legal authority to break through the seal 37 years later. The sealing operation had cost the government over $2 million and had required industrial equipment and specialized concrete. The site had been continuously monitored by security personnel for decades to ensure that no one attempted to access the sealed evidence. Government agents had been watching the mine property since 1988, ready to intervene if anyone got too close to the truth. Now, after 37 years of secrecy, the world was about to learn the complete truth about what had happened to the 19 missing miners. Federal investigators arrived at the scene within hours of the document discovery. They immediately confirmed the authenticity of the classified files using advanced forensic techniques. The evidence was overwhelming and completely undeniable. Multiple government agencies were directly implicated in the most serious crimes imaginable. The investigation was immediately expanded to include all 23 sites mentioned in the recovered documents. This was about to become the largest government scandal in American history. Congressional hearings were scheduled immediately to address the shocking revelations. The Attorney General announced that a special prosecutor would be appointed to handle the criminal investigation. International human rights organizations demanded their own independent investigations into the illegal experimentation programs. The United Nations Human Rights Council was officially notified about the systematic violations of human rights. The government could no longer hide or deny what they had done to innocent American citizens. News of the elevator discovery spread around the entire world within hours of the opening. Every major news network sent their top investigative teams to cover the developing story. Social media platforms were flooded with outrage and demands for immediate justice. The hashtag #Justice4. The 19 became a global trending topic within hours. The families of the murdered miners suddenly became the center of international attention. The story that the government had successfully buried for 37 years was now front-page news in every country around the world. International media outlets compared the government's actions to the human experimentation programs conducted by Nazi Germany during World War II. Civil rights organizations called it the worst government crime in American history. Massive protests began in major cities across the United States, demanding accountability and justice for the victims. The public outrage was unlike anything that had been seen in decades. Citizens who had trusted their government felt completely betrayed by the scope of the crimes that had been committed. The initial government response was complete denial of all the evidence. High-ranking officials claimed that the documents were elaborate forgeries created by foreign enemies. Press secretaries refused to answer any questions about the classified files or the missing miners. They suggested that the evidence had been planted by hostile foreign governments to damage America's reputation. Emergency meetings were held at the highest levels of government to develop a response strategy. But the evidence was far too overwhelming and scientifically verified to be dismissed or denied. Advanced document authentication techniques proved beyond any doubt that all the files were completely genuine. Handwriting analysis confirmed that the signatures on the elimination orders were authentic. Paper aging and ink analysis dated the documents to exactly the time periods indicated. Government officials who had initially denied the evidence began resigning from their positions rather than face questions about their involvement. The truth was simply too powerful and well-documented to be suppressed or explained away. Emergency congressional hearings began within 1 week of the elevator opening. Surviving government officials who had been involved in the cover-up were subpoenaed to testify under oath. Many of these officials claimed they had been just following orders from higher authorities. Others invoked their Fifth Amendment rights and refused to answer any questions about their participation. The families of the murdered miners were given the opportunity to testify publicly for the first time in 37 years. For the first time since 1988, they could tell their stories to the entire world. Sarah Morrison's emotional testimony brought the entire congressional hearing room to complete silence. She described 37 years of not knowing what had happened to her beloved husband, Jack. Other family members shared their decades of pain, loss, and unanswered questions. The entire nation watched as the true human cost of the government's crimes was revealed in heartbreaking detail. The family's powerful testimonies changed public opinion forever and made it impossible for anyone to defend the government's actions. The special prosecutor announced criminal charges against 47 people. Current and former government officials faced murder charges. Conspiracy charges were filed against hundreds of others. The largest criminal case in American history had begun. International arrest warrants were issued for officials who had fled the country. Justice was finally coming for the 19 miners. The charges included murder, conspiracy, and crimes against humanity. RICO charges were filed against the government agencies involved. Civil rights violations carried potential life sentences. International law experts were consulted about war crimes charges. The legal battle would take years, but the truth was finally out. Using the GPS coordinates from the documents, investigators located the burial site. It was in a remote desert area 300 miles from the mine. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed the presence of human remains. The excavation began under strict scientific protocols. Forensic anthropologists supervised the recovery operation. After 37 years, the miners were finally coming home. The remains of all 19 miners were found exactly where the documents indicated. Personal effects confirmed their identities. Forensic evidence showed they had been executed, not killed in accidents. The cause of death was consistent with the documents' descriptions. The physical evidence matched the documentary evidence perfectly. Forensic examination revealed the exact cause of death for each miner. They had been executed by government agents. The method was quick and efficient, designed to leave minimal evidence. Ballistics evidence was preserved despite 37 years of burial. The bullets were traced to government-issued weapons. The forensic evidence proved premeditated murder by government agents. DNA testing confirmed the identity of each victim. Age progression analysis matched the men's appearance at the time of death. Personal effects found with the bodies matched family descriptions. Wedding rings, watches, and other jewelry were returned to families. The families finally had proof of what happened to their loved ones. The families finally had the closure they had waited 37 years to receive. Funeral services were held for each of the 19 miners. The entire community came together to honor their memory. Sarah Morrison spoke at each service about her husband's bravery. The miners were buried as heroes who died trying to expose the truth. But the discovery in the elevator had revealed even more shocking secrets. Additional documents found in the elevator mentioned other victims. Workers from the 1950s and 1960s had also disappeared mysteriously. Their disappearances had been covered up using similar methods. The 19 miners were not the first victims of this conspiracy. The government's crimes went back much further than anyone had imagined. Investigators expanded their search to include decades of missing persons. Over 200 workers had disappeared from contaminated sites since 1950. Each disappearance followed the same pattern as the 19 miners. Government documents revealed a systematic elimination program. Anyone who discovered the truth about the contamination was silenced. The human experimentation program had been killing witnesses for 70 years. Family members of earlier victims came forward with their stories. They described similar government settlements and non-disclosure agreements. The same pattern of intimidation and cover-up had been used repeatedly. Hundreds of families had been living with lies for decades. The 19 miners were just the tip of an iceberg of government murders. The United Nations Human Rights Council launched an investigation. International criminal courts began considering war crimes charges. Allied nations expressed shock at the scope of the human experiments. Diplomatic relations were strained as the full truth emerged. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for key officials. America's reputation as a defender of human rights was destroyed. Trade partners began questioning other aspects of government honesty. International nuclear agreements were suspended pending investigation. Foreign governments demanded access to their own citizens' exposure data. The scandal threatened America's position as a world leader. The discovery in the elevator had changed America's standing in the world forever. Medical teams began screening all residents of the affected communities. Cancer rates were found to be 300% higher than national averages. Birth defects and genetic disorders were epidemic in the region. Thousands of people had been unknowingly suffering from radiation sickness. The government's own studies had documented the health effects for decades. They had been watching people die while hiding the cause. Emergency medical treatment was provided to all affected residents. Specialized cancer centers were established in each contaminated community. The government was ordered to pay for all medical treatment. Compensation funds totaling billions of dollars were established. The human cost of the cover-up was still being calculated. The first criminal trials began exactly 1 year after the elevator was opened. Government officials were convicted of murder in the first degree. The conspiracy charges resulted in life sentences for key participants. Civil lawsuits resulted in billions of dollars in damages. The largest class action settlement in history was approved. Justice was finally being served, but it couldn't bring back the dead. Constitutional amendments were proposed to prevent future government experiments. New oversight agencies were created to monitor government activities. Whistleblower protections were strengthened to encourage reporting. The victims' families became advocates for government transparency. The legacy of the 19 miners would protect future generations. A memorial was built at the site of the sealed elevator. It honored not just the 19 miners, but all victims of government experiments. The names of over 200 confirmed victims were engraved in stone. The memorial became a symbol of the fight against government secrecy. Visitors from around the world came to pay their respects. The sealed elevator had become a monument to truth. Educational programs were established to teach future generations. The story of the 19 miners became required curriculum in schools. Documentary films and books ensured the story would never be forgotten. Annual remembrance ceremonies honored the victims and their families. The truth that was buried for 37 years would now live forever. In the deepest part of the elevator shaft, investigators found one final document. It was a personal letter from Jack Morrison to his wife Sarah. He had written it on the morning of December 15, 1988. The letter described what the miners had discovered in the tunnels. He wrote that they planned to expose the truth no matter what happened. Jack Morrison had known they were in danger. The letter revealed the miners had tried to document the contamination. They had taken photographs and collected samples as evidence. Jack wrote that they would rather die than let the government continue poisoning people. He told Sarah to never stop fighting for the truth. The miners had sacrificed their lives to save their community. Sarah Morrison lived to see justice served at age 83. She held Jack's final letter during the memorial dedication. The 19 miners were posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Their sacrifice had exposed the largest government conspiracy in American history. The sealed elevator had preserved the evidence that brought down an empire of lies. What started as a mystery had become a movement for truth. Government transparency laws were passed in honor of the miners. The Morrison Act required public disclosure of all human experiments. Families around the world used the case to seek justice for their own losses. The story proved that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually surface. Sarah Morrison's final words at the memorial were simple. They died as heroes, and now the world knows. The 19 miners who vanished underground in 1988 had finally come home, and their sacrifice had changed the world forever. The story of the 19 miners vanished underground in 1988 stands as one of history's most shocking, real unsolved mysteries turned into a tale of justice finally served. What began as miners trapped underground became a decades-long cover-up that transformed into the ultimate true crime disappearance case. When that abandoned mine elevator was discovered sealed, after 37 years, it revealed not just missing person cases, but systematic government crimes against humanity. This mining disaster represents more than just another entry in famous mining disasters. It's a testament to how disappeared without a trace, cases can hide the darkest secrets. The mysterious disappearances of these miners, who vanished without explanation, ultimately exposed underground mine rescue efforts that were never meant to happen because there was never an accident to begin with. From unsolved missing person cases to real-life suspense mysteries, this story proves that even the most carefully buried truths eventually surface, no matter how many decades pass.